everybody! So today we are going to have a really interesting conversation. I'm sure you guys have already read the title down below. And I am here with one of my closest friends.
Hello, everyone. My name is Rachel Oristano. My friends call me Ray. And I'm here for a couple of reasons. One is because I have a background in counseling. I have a degree in Master's of Education in Mental Health Counseling. And also I happen to have 15 years of lived experience in the BDSM community. And Raquel and I talk a lot amongst ourselves about various topics and thought it might be fun if y'all wanted to be a fly on the wall of one of our takes and see if you'd enjoy this conversation.
Yes, perfect intro. I think I've been LARPing, so this is my decade. 2022 is my decade anniversary, and you have been doing it for almost half a decade, I believe, if we actually count it correctly. Yeah. So, you know, I think it's great to get, first off, two different perspectives on, like, LARP in general, and also just how it relates to the kink community. So I think with that, we can just kind of, like, get into it.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't remember exactly how we started talking about this, but for me personally, coming from the kink community and then going into LARP, it was really obvious to me how much these two communities and these forms of play, these forms of adult play, have in common. And that's one of the things I know, Rocky, you've been talking a lot about, is that LARP is really for grown-ups.
Yes.
That while, yes, there are events for younger folks and there are camps and what have you, this is actually an adult hobby.
Yes, it is an adult hobby, and I feel like there needs to be content that reflects the fact that this is an adult hobby that is meant for people who are like 18 and up. Like, yes, as you said, there are LARP camps and stuff like that, but they don't even cross vaguely into the things that we're talking about, you know. So I'm glad that we can finally approach this as mature adults and talk about the real tea. All right, like, yeah.
So we're kind of here to compare and contrast in a sense, and because we have different experiences and different points of entry, it's going to be interesting to see what is similar about our experiences with LARP and what is different and what that means for where we're coming from. But I guess to start us off, one of the obvious similarities that, of course, is that both of these communities involve roleplay. Obviously, with LARP, that is the core element of it. With kink, when we're talking about roleplay, as in, like, playing a character, playing a puppy for, like, puppy play or something, or, you know, playing a vampire, a sexy vampire, whatever, what have you. That is a facet of kink in that sense. Like, roleplay is a subset. It is a type of kink, a type of fetish. But that being said, when we are engaging in a power exchange within kink, that is a level of roleplay because you're doing something in this contained environment that you're not necessarily doing outside in the real world, especially not in the same way.
Right.
And also, honestly, LARP has a lot more power dynamics than I think people appreciate. Think about Malleus and think about you playing this peasant role versus, like, the noble lords.
Yep.
That's a power dynamic.
Yep. On the axis of class, but, like, yeah, that's absolutely a power dynamic. And like, even going further, vampire, a ghoul, and their vampire. Power dynamic, or vampire to vampire, depending on what generation they are, their ranking in the system. Like, all of that is literally power play. All of it.
Yeah, and so when you, in LARP, are saying, I'm going to play this type of character, and you're aware that this character has a particular role in the LARP game culture that everyone has created together, you're, in a sense, consenting to giving up or receiving a certain level of power based on that character you've created.
Yes, exactly. 160%. And I think that, you know, acknowledging that there's similarities between, like, kink and LARP, I feel like a lot of people have been like, no, don't do that. Like, don't speak about this. And it's like, But I think it's healthy. I think if we want to have these adult LARPs with these adult themes, we need to be able to have adult conversations. And I'm very, 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 very tired of the puritanical kind of attitude that the American, and to be fair, it's fading, but what we had for so long was that, like, oh, we can't talk about these things. We can't acknowledge that these similarities exist. We can't even say that we like them because, ooh, that means you're a deviant. And even though there are so many LARPers that outwardly say that they are part of, you know, kink, or that's something they're interested in, or it's something they're adjacent to, even though they acknowledge it outside of, like, the LARP world, it's like the fact that we see this crossover in our community, it's just, like, not supposed to be spoken about. So we're here to help demystify this, because there is nothing wrong with the fact that, like, yeah, roleplay in kink and roleplay in LARP exist. They're similar but also different, but I think the communities can learn from each other, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, and one of the reasons why we wanted to talk about this is because a lot of the things that they have in common, a lot of the overlap, are some of the healthiest things about these hobbies and these communities. And so right off the bat, I want to start talking about consent culture.
Yes.
Because that is such an important element of a safe game, a safe scene. And it's something that when I was a little baby kinkster, and by baby I mean like 19 to 23, depending on where you consider that entry to be, I was really struck by this this energy or this environment where, while consent was obviously explicit because it was talked about all the time, when you're new, when you go into this space, you can kind of see the way that plays out immediately. Like, it's immediately observable in the way that people interact with each other in a way that you don't necessarily see just, you know, in general, larger society. And I guess just to backtrack a little bit, I think I should probably talk about the different kind of aspects of kink culture. Yeah. So I'm mostly in this video going to be talking about kink community. That being said, there are some people that engage in kink only privately, only with their partner or partners, and never talk to anyone else about it except, like, in the farthest reaches of the internet. Then, of course, there are our beloved professional dominatrices and prodoms and so on, who are so crucial to the community, and I've learned so much of what I know from my friends who are prodoms. And while there can be a little bit of separation between the professionals and the lifestyle hobbyists, in my experience, I've been fortunate to be in communities where they're really overlapping, and so a lot of, like, pros might also be lifestyle hobbyists and are happy to come and teach and interact with the lifestyle folks. That being said, the majority of what I'm going to be talking about today is that community, that lifestyle where people go to maybe a public event. It might be public in that it's a space it's rented out and you pay to go in and go engage as a, you know, to pay for the rent that everyone has to contribute to, because that's how life is. Or, you know, there's private parties, which are like house parties and stuff like that. But a lot of community takes place in, like, rented out warehouses or hotels or what have you.
Yeah, not too dissimilar to how many LARPs just take place at camps or also hotels that are simply rent out.
Yeah, we also have kink events in the woods. Go figure.
I mean, like we saying, guys, there is a lot of crossover. So I did want to kind of expand and get into the whole consent topic as you were starting to introduce, because in LARP, and the most beautiful thing that I've seen that's happened over the 10 years, especially here in America, is that we've taken a lot of cues from the, you know, European scene. A lot of people would say the Nordic scene, but, like, Nordic LARP, as we understand it, does not exist in a vacuum. Like, yes, the Nords were the ones to, like, popularize it and maybe give some of the terminology, but, like, I have literally seen Nordic style LARPing created in a vacuum, like, with no influence from the rest of the community, which means that this is clearly a way where humans like to engage, and this is clearly a something that shows that, like, okay, people just want to be able to feel safe and like they can explore things and talk about things or narratives in spaces where everyone's on the same page. Everyone is agreeing to the rules of engagement, which, like, you guys are going to hear me use this term, the rules of engagement, a lot, because I think it's important to realize that, like, yes, not every LARP is for everybody. Not every level of touch or boundaries or even just, like, interplay between every player and every game is for everybody. And that's okay. And part of what that is informed consent, so that you can make the decision whether or not you want to go to a LARP. And then once you're there, you know, further informed consent on how you want to play on it. Yeah. Which, I mean, you can go all into that.
Yeah. So, since kink is my point of entry, you know, when you go into one of those communities, there's a similar thing where you have different stages of consent. So the first is you're going to an event and they'll usually have you sign a waiver, and that might include things like agreeing not to take pictures. They might have you put stickers over the camera on your phone. There might be an opportunity for you to consent or not to having your photo taken by a professional there, so they might have wristbands for yes or no, if you're okay with having photos taken for, like, the party website or something, versus like, no, don't want to risk my job, what have you. Unfortunately, it's a real concern for some people. So you have that level of consent going in. Then, you know, if there's a website or something, there will be all the rules of engagement will be listed there too. And then when you go into this space, if you want to interact with someone and engage with a scene, then there's the next level of interpersonal consent where you're negotiating, where you're talking about what you're into, what you're okay with, what you're not. There's also going to be, if it's a big space or maybe rooms or what have you, there's different scenes going on there too. So if you want to observe a scene, you can go observe a scene, but if it's a scene that isn't really for you or makes you uncomfortable, you can walk away and go to a different space and go to a different side of the event, and engage in a way that is more accessible to you. And so this level happens like at each space when it's done well. I'm not going to say that every space does it perfectly well because we're humans and we're fallible. But this is the general experience that I've had going to events in like at least 5 states.
Yeah, and honestly, they are, again, it's really not far off from exactly how things are done in LARP. Like, when you go to a LARP, especially in the United States, you sign a waiver. I don't know any LARP that doesn't make you, at least digitally or in person, sign something. And even now, LARPs that have photographers at them do the same thing, where it's like, oh, okay, these people want to be photographed, these people don't, like this, that, and the other. Or even if they say they want to be photographed, if there's a particular moment or costume that they don't feel comfortable in, they say that, you know. I think, you know, talking about the wristbands for a second, that is already a system that is used in a lot of American LARPs, and like the scene where, you know, red, yellow, green, Jackalope LARPs is really famous for kind of pushing this system more popularly in the United States, where it's like, you know, a green wristband means that you're okay with somebody touching you within the rules of engagement of the LARP, meaning like by you saying that you are going to wear a green band, you're okay with people naturally grabbing your hand, you know, touching you from like here down, and, you know, whatever else comes with that. Yellow means that you have to check in with the person, and red means don't even ask me. I'm not even interested. You know? Yeah,
and a fun fact, for those of you who don't know, that system of consent comes from the kink community. The stoplight system, red, yellow, green, is, or red, amber, green if you're in Europe maybe, that is one of the most commonly understood systems of consent within the scene. So you have your negotiation before, but then when you're engaging in the scene, it can be stopped at any time by anyone who's involved. And so typically, red means stop, we need to end everything, I need out. Yellow means check in with me, slow down, talk. It basically just means we need to figure something out here. And green is go, go, go. And so most events or houses will have that as understood. So if you have a dungeon monitor or someone circling, they'll understand when a safe word is used as well, and that way that the community can look after each other in a more cohesive way. Sometimes the safe word is also just safe word.
Yeah.
But yeah, like that 100% comes from the kink community.
Yeah, and actually, the whole safe word thing is too, and so we have the thing in LARP called calibration play, in which we diegetically use a safe word to tone down a scene. Mm-hmm. So like in Fairweather Manor, it was think of the family. And so if somebody said, think of the family, you would know to like, okay, if we're screaming at each other, let's pull it back a little bit. You know, if we're having this like heated argument, let's cool it down. You know, it was a great diegetical way to easily calibrate that kind of scene. And honestly, there are some LARP systems out there. Like, I think Sinking Ship Creations, when they did Project Ascension the first time, they also had, like, the thumbs up, thumbs down, and a red, yellow, green, and you would literally be able to say green.
Okay.
Or yellow. Cool. Or red. So, like, if you were actively talking in a roleplay scene, you could just briefly say yellow, and that would mean, like, let's not touch on it. Or, like, divert.
Yeah, you know? Yeah. And also, another thing we both have in common, actually, is use of nonverbal signals. Yep. So there's a lot of reasons in kink why someone might need one. The obvious one being that their mouth is otherwise occupied and they can't speak. Also because sometimes people go nonverbal when they're in subspace or have trouble communicating or what have you. And so something like holding a ball that you drop when you need to end the scene, or a bell or something like that. Maybe hand gestures, but usually something that makes noise so it'll catch the top's attention more easily.
Wow, yeah. I mean, so in LARP, the most common, like the number one most common system that I've seen used across the world is the thumbs up, thumbs down, and wavy hand. And basically, even some systems have altered it to have 2 thumbs up. So 2 thumbs up means not only am I great, keep going. Go harder, actually. And like a single thumbs up is like, no, this is great as it is. Please continue. Wavy hand is like, let's check in. Usually it means like stop immediately, check in, see what's going on, and then maybe continue or end the scene. And red means stop. Yeah. Everything stops right now. I'm not okay. And sometimes that means the player just needs to leave the scene, you know, and there's no retaliation from that. It's just like, it's not working out for me. Red, I'm out. You know?
Oh my goodness. This is not a safe word that's necessarily something everyone uses, though I've heard it in more than one place. But one of my favorite things is when someone is bored, they say beige.
Beige! I love that. That's great. Okay, gosh. That is, I'm trying to think if there is a LARP equivalent to that, and I think there is, which is, Oh My Mother or something like that, actually in Malleus, or Oh Mother or something, and that means like, let's go, like do it, you won't. And I just think it's great because like those visual cues or, you know, diegetical verbal cues really allow people not only to feel safe off game, but like navigating tougher topics or scenes in game.
Yeah, and so another aspect of that creates this environment of psychological and practical safety is the structure that's put in place for both communities. And so what I'm talking about is, in addition to consent culture, the structure of the way a scene typically goes. Yeah. And so we have our pre-care, we have our scene, and then we have our aftercare. And this allows us to take care of each other more effectively, to mitigate drop, which we'll talk about later on.
Yes.
And to make sure that our needs are met at each step of the way. So for pre-care, that's talked about a little bit less just because aftercare tends to steal the show. But pre-care can look like, for example, if you are going to do a bondage scene, stretching before, warming up, things like that. Negotiation. Yep. Negotiation is definitely part of pre-care. Checking in about potential triggers or any type of safety issues that you might need to know in advance. That's all pre-care.
Pre-care.
Then you have your scene, and then you have aftercare. And aftercare is whatever is necessary for all parties involved to wind down properly and kind of come back to earth in a sense. So that could look like, and it's different for everyone, which is why it needs to be part of negotiation, right? So that could look like being bundled up in a burrito and cuddled for however long, or that could look like getting food, because I said burrito, now I'm thinking of food, I'm kind of hungry. It could look like maybe some people after a scene might not want to be touched because they've been overstimulated, but they want someone just to sit with them and be there.
It could be a bath.
It could be a bath, yes. Yep. Taking a bath, getting some water, tying up the rope that you just used because you have something to do with your hands. Like, all of these things could factor in as aftercare. And that's something, like, again, it needs to be negotiated. So if you're someone who needs a particular aftercare, you can make sure that you're compatible with your scene partner that way as well. And, you know, certain things aren't for everyone. So let's say that the way that you need aftercare is not something that your top is comfortable giving, but you really want to do a scene together. A way that you can manage that is maybe you have an aftercare partner. You know, there's nothing that says that it has to be from the same person that did the scene, as long as you're comfortable with it and everybody is informed and consenting.
It's like, honestly, exactly that. And us in LARP over here, I mean, you know, our pre-care would be our workshops before game, where we sit down and the entire game gets told, again, the rules of engagement. So how the LARP works, what is okay, what is not okay, and then even being broken down into groups to further, you know, if you're part of a certain team or clan or family or whatever, and talk about what your roleplay needs are within that group, or maybe saying like, hey, I have a trigger around this, so if you scream directly next to my head, it might cause a panic attack, or something like that, and just so that the other people that you're immediately going to be playing with know kind of what's up, or like what to avoid with you. And even in games where they're smaller and invite only, or even application only like Malleus, it's easier because you guys, you know not only from the workshops, but you guys are more likely to actually know each other and like develop relationships, which makes it safer to engage in that way. And then of course you have, you know, people who check in during the LARPs, even sometimes when there's no, you know, mid-game calibration check-in, a lot of people will just go ahead and do that, like at Fairweather Manor. You know, every morning the family, we would have to get together because that was part of like the thing that you do in the game, is that you have breakfast with your family and then you go down for the big breakfast. You have tea with your family, and we would just talk, and we would go out of game and we would just like cut it for a second and be like, hey, everybody having a good time? You know, this is my character. This is what I'm doing. Do you want me to be meaner to you? Do you want me to be a worse father? Do you want me to be a better father? Like, people were so... And it really helped, especially figuring out what you wanted from your experience. And then, of course, after the game, many LARPs will do, like, a cooldown where, like, immediately after the LARP ends, you can go into a room, sit in a circle, and maybe talk about it. You know, the night in question, after they set everything on fire, they are immediately like, okay, the game's over, and if you guys need a cooldown or an after, you guys can go do that. And it's also not always mandatory. Like, I don't usually feel like I need that afterwards, because I've been doing this a long time and I kind of know how I'll process most LARPs after I'm done. Right. So I don't necessarily need that, but it is still there for all the people who feel that they need to, you know, and that's totally fine. But usually the next part that we're going to go into that people tend to have a hard time with is that even if you do these things, sometimes you can still suffer from a LARP drop. And LARP drop or event drop or just social drop, whatever we want to call it, I'm sure is something that affects your community too.
Yeah. And I think a lot of folks also know as con drop, because it's like in the greater nerd community, we kind of all have conventions. Like, I feel like no matter what we're doing, at some point there's a convention where a bunch of us weirdos meet somewhere with our shared hobbies and interests and just like forget the rest of the world exists and doesn't know what we're talking about for a little bit. 160%.
160%.
But yeah, so drop. So yes, in addition to the event drop element of it, it can be a little bit more interpersonal with kink in particular, because of the short and fast, comparatively speaking, intensity of scenes. So we have a bunch of different terms, and it's just about who's it happening to. So sub drop, top drop, dom drop, whatever. And while there are common physiological symptoms of like fatigue and lethargy, and, you know, maybe if you tend toward headaches, maybe get a headache, whatever that looks like, psychologically, it does tend to almost go along with what your role or orientation was. So for subs, that might be feeling regretful of how they were vulnerable, or feeling ashamed of their kinks, or just like, oh my god, I can't believe I did that with this person and they saw this part of me, I don't know what to do, I feel maybe do they not like me now, et cetera, et cetera. And then, from the other end, from Doms and Tops, it can look like, oh God, I hurt someone. Oh no, I'm a horrible person.
How could I like this?
Oh no.
Yeah.
More shame about kinks. And oh gosh, did I get that tie wrong? I have to go research this right now and find out what I did wrong so I don't do it again. It's not like I've been there or something. Yeah, so that's something that, it's not always 100% avoidable. Sometimes it'll get you no matter what, and some people might be more or less susceptible. It might just depend on the event or what your emotional connection was with the person you played with. But things that can help you mitigate it are aftercare, are greater community care. So aftercare one-on-one looks like the things we talked about before, but community, like you were talking about afters and cool down and all that, we have that too in the kink community. When we go to an event and we're up until 2 a.m. and lights come on, guess what we do next? We go to a diner.
Yep. Same thing after LARP. We all go to the local diner and we all chat about our cool experiences. Same thing. Yep.
Eat a bunch of greasy food, get vitamins replenished, get some water, get some,
Then go home and shower.
Maybe, if we have the energy, or just collapse face first in your bed with
I've
all
done
your
that
makeup
too,
on.
straight up. I'll admit it, I've done it too. And that's the thing, is that a lot of people, I think, with LARP drop or whatever we want, just drop in general, I felt it too. And sometimes it's even after, I've gone away, I recently just went away to Canada to go visit Kalamazoo, and I knew that afterwards I was gonna need a day or two just to sleep. Just to sleep and not speak. And you guys have to understand, I'm an extrovert. I love people. People are I can people all the time. But even then, after peopling straight for a week on full E mode, I still need to rest, otherwise I will feel that drop later this week.
Yeah.
If I just keep going. And honestly, the drop can even lead into burnout, where you just can't even deal with having these emotions around LARP or how you're feeling with it, and just makes you feel worse. And it can lead to a lot of things, which is why taking the time to make sure that you are giving yourself that aftercare after a LARP event or whatever you may be doing is really, really important too.
Yeah, and just to say, as someone who is considerably more introverted, sometimes what I need is to be away from people faster. And so my aftercare actually looks like leaving before everybody else does, so that I don't have to endure 30 hugs and goodbyes from people because I'm fucking tired and I just want to be around my cats and no one else.
And honestly, that's totally fine. You, at the end of the day, you do what you need to do to feel safe and comfortable engaging with the LARP, and especially when you need to go home. Drop is, especially with people who maybe aren't used to like being around so many people, it could be like this overwhelm of like social interaction. All of a sudden it's all gone.
Right.
And then what to do, you know?
Right. Especially if you also, you know, maybe your job isn't great. Maybe other things about your life are, you know, not so great under late stage capitalism. And you just have this really magical weekend where you got to forget about that. And you're coming back to unfortunate reality. Mundania.
Yeah.
So we've set the stage, we've set the containers, we've set this discussion around like consent culture that both have. So now we have this really safe environment, hopefully. Nothing's perfect, but we've made an effort to create a safe environment and to create a space in which people can communicate with each other and be really clear with each other about their needs and their boundaries and what's okay to what's maybe a little flexible and what's our hard limits and all of those good things. And that gives us a space where we can explore experiences that we've had, parts of ourselves, healing that we need to do, in a situation that is much safer to us in these interesting ways than real life might be.
100%. And like, I think, you know, being able, like, LARP inherently takes vulnerability. Like, you have to be vulnerable with yourself and with other people, and sometimes that can lead you to discover a lot of things, you know? Like, I personally, and I'm happy to talk about it, like, was able through LARP to understand that I'm bisexual, and that that was okay. And then I had like a lot of weird internal stuff around it, and I didn't realize it until I played a character, which was actually at Project Ascension, who was literally a gay android. And I was like a little pink Terminator, and I had a partner. And in real life, you know, we both at the time identified as straight, and it kind of, at least I can speak for myself, helped me realize like, oh, I do like that kind of intimacy, or I do like being in touch with this, you know, queer part of myself. And that it only happened because I was in an environment where I felt safe enough to even explore, even stick my toe into that. And that's why, like, creating these, you know, very consent heavy environments and these very emotionally conscious environments is basically integral to making LARP work.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And then, like, likewise, doing kinky things that are not necessarily sexual, because one misconception about kink is that it's inherently sexual. It's not.
Yep.
For perhaps you as an individual, maybe the thing that attracts you to it is the fact that it turns you on in some way, or that's how you're defining your fetishes and your identity around it. But that's not the same for everyone, and especially in a lot of these larger events, while some of them do allow for certain genital contact sexual activity, most of them don't, because they're following state laws and they're following certain regulations, and so it's stimulation and intimacy that's not explicitly directly sexual in the way in terms of sexual contact
or something like that.
Yeah, and so for me, this was actually a way for me to explore demisexuality, because it was a way for me to explore intimacy without the expectation of sex necessarily, unless I wanted it to go there with the right person, but I could connect with people in a different way. And then through that, yes, also I use the term biromantic because I'm demisexual, but exploring that, it took me a long time to come to that because I didn't realize I was demi. And when you're demisexual or ace, those of y'all know, it can be harder to figure out who you're attracted to because it takes a longer time to get from point A to point B.
Yeah.
In that attraction, but being able to take the pressure off in a sense through these community connections created an environment where I could figure that out without pressures of a highly sexualized culture, which sounds super counterintuitive given most people's stereotypes around kink.
Yeah. And I think, you know, as we acknowledged in the beginning here, you know, we're trying to facilitate adult conversations about an adult hobby. And it is okay for LARPs to have, you know, a little bit of sexy content or dubious themes, which we will get into in another video.
Yes.
But we know that one's probably not going to be able to be monetized, so.
It'll be fun, though.
Yeah, it will be fun.
Worth it.
But, like, I think, you know, having this acknowledgement where it's okay for things to be a little sexy at LARP. It's okay for you want to explore that at LARP. Like, you know, it's funny because when the night in question first started, it was kind of tongue-in-cheek where we were all like, it's all right, it's a little sexy, actually. Even though there was zero, like, intercourse, like, nobody, I mean, topless nudity was allowed, but you were never allowed to take your pants off, like, no matter your gender. All tops are allowed to come off, not the bottoms. And, like, people kind of vibing with that, or even when it came to feeding and whatnot, like, let's like, not pretend that vampires aren't kind of sexy, okay? So, like, you know, like feeding on one another, and whether that be like pretending and having, you know, your wrist your hand on somebody's neck and like biting instead of like actually kissing them or whatever on the neck, you know, it was allowing people to kind of feel, especially, you know, having gone to it now in 2021, to feel safe about engaging with that, even that level of intimacy, because there was that understanding of like touch and consent and all of that, which I kind of want to get into now that we've kind of touched on, you know, drop and whatnot. Now, would you say that the kink community maybe has something similar with like bleed or something like that as we know it in LARP?
Well, you know, why don't you give me an example in LARP and I'll tell you if I think it's similar or
okay,
not.
So for you guys who maybe haven't seen my What is LARP video, bleed is the the act of your emotions, like the feelings that you're feeling, going from an out-of-game space to an in-game space, or from the out-of-game space to the real world. And it doesn't mean that it's inherently negative. I think there was a large misconception for a time where bleed was like, oh, if you had bleed, you were like a bad person. That's not how it works. Bleed can be something as good as, oh, you've become a friend with somebody in the game as your character. And because you guys are friends in game, it has allowed you guys to develop a friendship in real life, out of the game. That's good bleed. Bad bleed would be if, Ray, I was annoyed with something, I was mad at you, and then in-game, I used my in-game character to express that frustration and anger at you in an unhealthy way. That's, like, bad bleed.
Right, and that's different from if we both decided that we wanted to play characters that hated each other, and we were having fun, like, fake fighting the entire time.
And we would even probably check in with each other afterwards anyway. Yeah. Just to be sure.
So, I think with kink it's a little bit more complicated. It certainly exists because, let's be real here, we do not exist in a vacuum. We are not mindless robots. We have emotions and experiences, and we're not able to completely separate our histories and all of these things from our day-to-day experiences, and certainly not from our intimacies and the way that we engage with people. In fact, that's part of it. We just have to be aware of it. So with kink, yeah, we absolutely do have to be careful because, you know, taking the anger example, if someone is upset about their day at work and they bring that into a scene, that can lead to crossing a boundary, perhaps, if they're the top and they overdo it and they're not paying attention the way that they should be to the other person because they're too wrapped up in their own anger. Or as the bottom, maybe they want to go further than they're actually comfortable with, than would actually be safe for them in that moment, physically or emotionally, and so they end up letting the scene go too far because everyone in the scene is responsible for what's going on. So that can obviously be a problem. And that being said, it can also be a healthy processing space if it's done mindfully and if it's done consensually. So for example, coming into a space where you were angry in work and then you're in the kink space, you can forget it. You can, like, let it go.
Leave it at the door.
You can leave it at the door. You can use that scene as a way to, like, hyper-focus on someone else and your connection with that person. Sorry, it's Philadelphia. I don't know if y'all heard that.
Philadelphia.
To hyper-focus on that connection and intimacy with another person, and that can help relieve you of some of what you've been dealing with in your day-to-day life. And, you know, a good thing could be that the experiences you have in the kink community, being self-assured, learning to take care of each other, learning to express your wants and needs, that can get carried over into real life.
Absolutely. And, like, same thing in LARP, those skills carry over into real life, and being able to understand your emotional boundaries, or, like, you know, I think we have done well in the US to establish this culture of, like, you are responsible for you. You're responsible for your mental health. You're responsible for knowing your own boundaries. Like, that's on you. If you want to play in the space with everybody, you need to know when you need to stop. And I think for a long time, we had a community that was, like, expected to, like, police or like predict your emotions based off the game or whatever. And I'm so glad that we've moved to this, like, self-accountability, like, where it's all about, like, hey, if this scene is going on and you don't like it, you can just remove yourself and move to a different part of the game, you know? And most games are very upfront as well about, like, the things you can avoid that might be triggering, the things you cannot avoid that are being triggered. Like, that is something that, like, Jackalope is great about, and Damarong is great about, and Malleus and so many other games are great about, where literally it's like, hey, these are the slightly avoidable topics, which is, like, bullying, you know, some substance abuse, things like that. Here are the unavoidable topics: gore, you know, murder, whatever, all of these other things. And I think, you know, being responsible is not just about, you know, yes, obviously respecting your fellow man's boundaries and the rules of engagement of the game, but also for yourself and understanding what that means to you, you know?
Yeah, and there is, you know, this interaction between the responsibility we have to take accountability for ourselves and then also taking care of each other.
Yep.
And that all takes conscious awareness of like what the actual issue at hand is. So for community care in the kink world, a simple example of that is DMs, dungeon monitoring, because we do call our spaces dungeons because we're like dark and spooky edgelords. But we also laugh at ourselves, so maybe not so much. But dungeon monitoring is a volunteer position, being a DM. It's rotated, so it's not like one person or a few people are going around policing everybody every single time. We're community members taking care of each other. So a dungeon monitor's job is to make sure that people are following the house rules so that we don't get kicked out of the venue, which is kind of important. They're also there to just help keep an eye on a scene, so that maybe if the sub safe words and the dom doesn't hear, or there's like something that doesn't seem like everyone is doing okay, the dungeon monitor can just go in and check.
Yep.
And just like be like, hey, you all right? And then also, dungeon monitor might be there to help facilitate, let the scene be what it is, and then reassure people that all of the fake screaming in the scene is in fact fake and fun and part of the game, and isn't there to and that way people don't have to be so worried about it.
Right.
Which is something I've done as a DM. That's been my role at one point. But that's that's like all of this mutual care, and as a DM, you're a member of the community, so you might also be DM'd by someone that you were just looking after.
I just think it's crazy because, like, okay, so in LARP, we call those rules marshals. They're rules marshals. Or they're like, they're like community or cultural guides or whatever in the game. Like, it's literally the same exact, or referee, whatever we want to call whatever game you go to that uses the term. It's basically literally the same thing, where, like, they're there just to kind of, like, sometimes they're even playing the game, and it's like a really, they might observe a scene and then, check in with everybody afterwards, or they may see something going on and be like, hey, that violates our safety rules, don't do that. Like, something like that. I just, again, guys, the similarities are not that far off.
Right. I mean, also, let's be real, there's a reason why there's so much overlap between the communities. Like, there just is. And that being said, though, one thing that's different, and this just struck me, someone, like, again, my point of entry was BDSM first and then LARP later, is that there does tend to be a lot of, I'm talking about American LARPs. European LARPs, y'all have a different experience, call me. But with American LARPs, there does tend to be, like, this sense, I'm going to try and say this word. I don't know if I can say it at midnight or whenever we're filming right now. Sensationalization, that's the word I'm trying to say.
Yes.
Sensationalization of the quote-unquote scary subject matter or the adult subject matter.
Yes.
And then to me coming in, I'm like, y'all are just playing pretend. What you think is scary is like, you're pretending to flog someone, you're pretending to torture someone, and we're just like a few steps at like, it's consensual torture, but it's like we're actually making marks, like
the
we're
impact
actually, things are actually happening, and you all are just like miming the things. And so
we're miming it.
Why is it such a big deal for you?
God, I wish I knew. And I really think it boils down to like the culture we've just had here in the US, like even just like outside of nerddom, and things that of course tangentially influence nerddom and the way that we approach things like this, because you're right, we're just miming it. It's not even actually happening, guys. Like, I literally talked about how we mime fake sex. Like, it's not real. Like, so, I think there has been this, I've seen like two halves of the community bubble up against each other, which is like the half which is like, hey, allow us to have the space to do these more intense adult topics or narratives or themes or whatever. And the other half that's like, well, I don't like that because it makes me uncomfortable. You can't do it. Nobody can do it. And it's like, that's not... First off, that's not healthy. Just, like, it's okay not to like something. It's okay if something makes you personally uncomfortable. But then to say that, like, no game or the community can't have a safe, like, avenue to explore it, I'm not down with that.
So in the kink community, with respect to that, there's this tongue-in-cheek phrase called "your kink is not okay," and it's meant to be ironic. It's meant to be critiquing people that want to like kink police or kink shame members of our own community when we're in this community because we feel shamed by the larger vanilla society. And while there are some kinks, particularly around like racial fetishization, that need to be talked about because that is a larger systemic issue, and because we don't exist in a vacuum, most kinks, as long as they are consented to between adults and negotiated and everyone is enjoying themselves and everyone comes out okay, like you shouldn't be judging everyone or saying that they can't do it just because it's not your kink. Like, there are plenty of things that I'm not into, and it's okay that other people want to do them. And if I'm at an event and someone is doing something that makes me feel uncomfortable, not unsafe, not in danger, just uncomfortable, I can leave that area and go to another part and stop watching the thing that made me uncomfortable and take my adult self over here and play with a different group of people.
Wow, that sounds really familiar. Almost like we can almost do that in LARP.
Right.
It's the same thing. And it's like, I think the thing is, too, is that I do agree with what a designer told me once, which is, like, if we're going to have games that focus, intensely on explicit and normally sexual content, those games must be focused on that in a thoughtful way to make sure that the environment is safe.
Yeah.
And I also totally agree with that, where, like, so Giovanni the Last Supper is a LARP that is happening in the UK in 2023, and it's run by a mixed race, non-binary couple, and they are absolutely fabulous. And they made it very clear where it's like, hey, we're going to be talking and touching on a lot of dark and, like, messed up themes and topics, but we're going to be very explicit with the fact that, like, this is not a game where you're going to be getting nude. Like, this is a game where, like, yes, we may talk about it, there may be implications of it, but they're not even really allowing people to, like, role play it out, like, to show it, and that's okay. And just even the discussion of some of the topics, dubious or not, may even just be enough for people to go, that's not the game for me, or that is the game for me. And I think now that we're even able to have games that have the option is half the battle, and half the importance is that, like, mistakes and things and boundaries and the way art is made, if people aren't given a safe way to explore those things, they will explore them unsafely.
That is true.
And that is what we want to mitigate, is that we don't want these things to happen at games that they shouldn't be. We don't want these boundaries crossed with people in a way that they shouldn't be. And if we allow spaces that encourage this healthy conversation and, frankly, an avenue to explore these things, it will probably lead to a healthier community overall.
Yeah, it's a harm reduction model.
Yep, exactly that.
And, also, that's the thing, is that by creating these spaces, we can engage with these topics in a way that can be healing and can be more thoughtful and more conscious than the way we are forced to engage with them in greater society.
I completely agree with that. And, like, quickly going back to even the idea of, like, playing on the axis of race in a LARP. There was a LARP here that no longer exists in the US that was called Velvet Noir. And Velvet Noir was one of the first LARPs to ever exist in the US that allowed people of color, and was specifically created as a space for people of color to play on their history and the dark nature of what it meant to be a person of color, not even just black, but a person of color in America in, like, the 20s and 30s. And, it was ahead of its time because the community was definitely not ready to engage with that. And what happened is that instead of people being honest about them feeling uncomfortable about playing that, even though they signed up for it, and I'm specifically talking about the white members of our community that specifically then co-opted the game to make it about be gay, do crime, when in reality it was supposed to be a safe place for people of color to explore their oppression. and understand how maybe that makes them feel, or where it comes from, or what about, their oppression influences them, and etc. And they weren't able to have that space because, people weren't really down with the rules of engagement, even though it was explicitly stated. Mm-hmm. And it's okay for people of color to want to explore those things. It's okay for, anybody to want to maybe understand why this is the way that they feel about this or whatever. And again, if we have healthy ways that we can do it, it will allow people to explore those things without harming others.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you're talking about a key element here, which was that this concept and this was initiated by people of color to discuss issues affecting people of color, right? You have a right to experience that and to discuss that and to play with that in a safe environment. And it's really not okay for the dominant party to then go and insert themselves again.
And co-opt it.
Like they do all the time. Like we white people do all the time, sorry. Just because we're feeling uncomfortable about the truth of your experience. And if you don't mind me continuing to use as an example for like kink related things, if you as a woman of color want to use kink to explore the way that you feel exoticized by other people, particularly white men, then that's your right to decide to process it that way. It's a very different thing if a white person wants to insert themselves and decide, hey, let's do a plantation LARP.
Yeah, and it's happened.
Because so we have to make sure that when we're talking about these things and when we're exploring these things, that we allow for space for people who have been affected, marginalized, harmed to take authority over their story and their narrative and have autonomy. Also thinking about survivors in these communities as well. And also from the other perspective, for people who are in the role of social hierarchy dominance, who might, like, say, I don't know, have a military fetish or something like that. I'm using something that's probably pretty common, but it's also worth...
Men in uniform.
Right. But it's also worth interrogating why we have this fetish. Where does it come from? We live in a very militarized country, in a very militarized society, in a society that's been at war in some way or another for decades, if not a full century at this point. So what is it about that, besides the fact that someone looks good in a uniform, that is attractive to us and that
get your jimmies off.
that we want to play with? And so I think it's like you're saying, like, it's okay to talk about these things. It's even necessary to talk about these things, but we have to do so mindfully.
160%. And, like, even bringing that into the LARP space, I mean, even allowing yourself to understand why, like, I love playing healers. I think I've played at this point probably for over 10 years. I think 5 of my 10 major characters I've played have been healer or healer adjacent class. And it's allowed me, as I've gotten older, because remember, I started LARP at 15 when you're not really thinking about these things and these greater implications. But, like, I look back now and I'm like, oh, well, I like playing healers because, like, I like to feel like I am helping people or healing things. Like, I like to not necessarily fix people or fix things, but, like, it's like, I like the feeling of, oh, wow, like, I'm improving this environment, I'm improving this world, which is also why I like playing characters that literally are just existing in the world, like Odette, who is literally just a tavern keep, and she just exists, and yet her existence influences, like, a ton of the game, because I talk to everybody, or I hand out secrets and whatnot. And, like, playing LARPs and understanding, like, your type, like the type you most like to play, what that says about you, or what that means for you on a deeper level, or, like, what kind of narratives call out to you the most. I mean, there is nothing wrong to say that you prefer happy endings or sad endings or everything in between, because that's your preference. And it's also okay in LARP to challenge what that means to you, to maybe play against your type, to play, if you always play good, maybe play bad and see what that means to you and what that represents to you. And again, it's just like the parallels are ever growing.
And the thing that had made me think about before, because therapy brain, I can't not think about this stuff all the time, is there's a form of therapy called parts work or internal family systems, and it's predicated on the idea that we have different parts in our psyche that came up at certain times in our lives that exist to protect us in different ways. Even if it doesn't seem like it, they are there to help us. They're trying their best, and they might come out at different points in our lives, and sometimes they really just need to be seen and validated and appreciated for the role that they've taken, and then, you know, encouraged to maybe try something different. And picking these roles in LARP or in kink that can help validate what our parts need as well and help them feel seen goes a long way to helping us integrate and communicate with these parts of ourselves that otherwise wouldn't have gotten any attention, and they really want attention.
Honestly, I literally couldn't have said it better. And I'm speaking as somebody who does actively do part therapy. You know, I am somebody who's been diagnosed with PTSD, and parts therapy has, you know, it's great for people who also have a great imagination and can have those conversations, you know, with yourself. And through parts therapy, as you were saying, it's like I've been able through LARP to have those, you know, parts of me feel seen and feel heard. And, you know, I realize now too, you know, being a black woman in a very white, nerdy community, you know, and I touched on this on my Drakenfest video, like playing, especially as a child, playing a soft, like, healer character, you know, was basically unheard of back in like 2012, and understanding like that's what and the reason that I got so angry about being at that LARP wasn't just because of the like insane amount of abuse I endured from adults, but also the fact that like my character wasn't being seen and played upon the way she probably would be now, where, you know, black women and, you know, everybody in between, black men or just other POC in general, are allowed to be soft. They're allowed to be delicate and allowed to, you know, we don't always have to be these aggressive coded characters. And I don't think I would have ever been able to see or feel or even learn that that's what I wanted from myself without, you know, LARP being an avenue for that part to feel seen. You know?
Yeah, like that is a really good point, is that it's important that we make spaces for more marginalized people in these communities, because there's so much that is healing about them. Like, you know, like as women, we're also expected not to be assertive as well. It's like you are in the trap of being seen as assertive but also not allowed to be assertive, or aggressive and not allowed to be assertive at the same time. But you know, if you're a woman and you're a dom, you are celebrated for it within your community, right? And that's not something that you get in a lot of other parts of the culture. Especially, so and honestly, the only other place I can think of is like kind of toxic girl boss culture, but that's an entirely different conversation, and that's also something specific for white women, you know? Anyway, that will take, that soapbox is way too tall. I don't have the energy to climb up there right now.
But I mean, so even, you know, LARP itself, and I would even say that, you know, as somebody who isn't really as deep into the kink community, you know, I'm a very big proponent of educating people in the fact that LARP is art. LARP is an art. It is a skill that you must learn and you must develop over a long time, just like anything else with drawing or even, I'm sure, tying somebody up. It's an art. It takes time and practice. And, you know, with art, the ideas of, like, good art makes you feel. Art is supposed to make you feel. It's supposed to make you question. And, you know, LARP to me is first off, a form of art I don't think human beings have ever really had, ever.
I disagree with that, but I think that's for part 2.
Okay, yeah. You'll have to watch the second one for that. But, like, even then, just, like, it's such a beautiful avenue of exploration, and it teaches things like empathy. It teaches things like, you know, community engagement and consent and whatnot. And I think that, you know, as we've said, LARPing is an adult hobby.
Yeah.
It's okay for those things to maybe challenge what you know.
Yeah, and I actually think that recognizing it as an adult hobby and that we are adults with autonomy and responsibility, and both for ourselves and for each other, will go a long way toward creating an improved LARP culture that allows us to do more fun and more powerful things within the medium.
I totally agree. You know, in Europe, it's very common to have LARPs that are like, geez, I deal with everything from, like, war and, like, living through an active war zone, or, like, what happens post a war or post the fall of society, or, you know, complicated sexual relationships or romances or both, or, you know, frankly, even just, like, crazy sex cults. Like, they are able to push
Tell me more about that.
Like, those games are able to exist in Europe because fundamentally the way that they approach these adult topics, like, nobody ever would think that a child would come to these games or would be encouraged to come to these games. And I feel like, you know, we've lived in this weird in-between with LARP where it's like, is it for kids? Is it for adults? Can it be for kids? Yeah. Is it really for adults? Mostly, actually. I don't know any major LARP that deals with any type of difficult theme that isn't 18 and up.
And actually, I was thinking about this. One of the things that I have observed to be somewhat different between the two is that one of the reasons why most of the LARP events are in the US 21 and over and the rest of the world 18 is because there tends to be alcohol.
Yep.
Not always. It might also be technically not allowed, but people bring it anyway. But it's one of those things that, you know, there's always the potential for it to happen in a sense. And so the age limit is considered around that, whereas with the kink community, while it will of course vary for a private house party, typically a lot of the events are supposed to be dry, because it's not considered safe to tie someone when your fingers are numb, to receive impact play when you're losing sensation and judgment.
Yep.
Right? Judgment is the first thing to go. So it's generally frowned upon to have a substance of any kind, but particularly alcohol, because that tends to be the most common involved in kink events.
Wow. And, like, so, you know, wet LARPs, as we know them here in the US, is a LARP that allows alcohol. And I think, you know, it's different in Europe because, again, baseline, they have a different culture around that. So most LARPs, like, in Europe, it's like, if you don't have alcohol, it's kind of, like, weird. But in the US, it's a very intentional thing. Like, a wet LARP will let you know that it's a wet, and even a game that doesn't have like a wet LARP event may have one once a year. Like Damarong isn't a wet LARP except for Yule. And Yule is their one wet LARP event where they're going to, you know, have booze and things like that, and they're allowed to with the camp and whatever.
Or even then, like, it might, even if it's not a wet LARP, it might be something that you bring for afters.
Yeah.
Right? So it's like, you don't necessarily have the drink during the game, but when it's 3 a.m. and you're all just sitting around a fire, then yes, the alcohol comes out, and, you know, just because the fact that it's present at all.
Yep.
And the understanding that it's most likely going to be means that we can't have people under a certain age attending these games. And also, you know, another big thing about all of the adult nature of a lot of the games, the way that you said they're called emergent LARPs
emergent
in the US,
LARPs,
are in the direction that they're going. For these reasons, a lot of them are starting out with invite-only, higher levels of vetting to make sure that everyone involved has some known history of being a good player and also can take care of themselves.
Yeah, that is like, and even to go back to like the age limit thing, there are even LARPs that are made in Europe that are 25 and up.
Really?
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
That are 25 and sometimes even 30 and up, because they feel that there needs to be a level of maturity in your development for you to play the game properly. Which, like, to be fair, when I was like 21. That pissed me off. But now at 25 going on 26, makes a lot more sense.
So in kink culture, there's typically not the actual kink events are not usually separated by age except for age of consent. But we do have something called munches. And yes, I know it sounds dirty, but it's actually the more innocent thing. Munch just means eating food, because usually these events happen at like a diner or a restaurant or something, or a bar. And so these are not active kink events, so there's not actual play or scenes happening, but it's just a way for people to meet and greet each other, socialize with other kinksters, and generally engage with community without the pressure of participating. So, you know, let's say you're not comfortable with public play, but you still want to be involved and have friends that also do kink and meet them in person, to go to a munch. Like, that's a great option. But in some cities, and this actually started in New York at Paddles, the munches are divided by age, and the reason for this is to allow create a space primarily for younger folks. So in New York, the one at Paddles, it's called the Next Generation, and the limit is age 30. So when you're 30, you age out of this munch. But it's meant to create a space so that younger people coming into the community can do so feeling less intimidated. And then if they feel comfortable enough, then they can go to the all ages munch, and go engage with that. Not every city has the Next Generation. I honestly don't even know if that's how much that's continued. But I did that when I was starting out in Philly, and it was really nice to be able to go and just be with a bunch of people closer to my age for something that was kind of new and kind of scary. And that way we were able to build confidence amongst each other. And, you know, if we're going to go interact with people of all ages, we already kind of knew something about the community before we did that. And so it might not sound like a big deal if you're older, but if you're like 19, 20, 21, 23, whatever, and you aren't comfortable with potentially older people that immediately want to talk to you and scene with you and have maybe had like 30 years of experience, and you're really intimidated by that, it's a really helpful thing.
No, yeah, I could, and you know, and so, you know, the reason why most LARPs have now capped at like 18, or most even more common now, 21 and up, isn't just because of the wet LARP thing. It was also because, like, you know, unfortunately, and I'm talking as somebody who started as a minor in LARP, a lot of LARPs weren't safe for minors, or a lot of LARPs, whether or not they knew it or had it listed, did have very sexy-ish concepts that maybe, even though a minor wouldn't necessarily run into it, the fact that they could engage with it and people didn't know exactly how old they were off game, and like it was like it would just get really messy. And you know, now I would even say, like, at Drakenfest, you have to be 18 years or older, and if you, it doesn't matter if you're 17, you still must have a parent or guardian with you at all times at the event. And this is to ensure your own safety, because, like, you know, again, we don't live in a vacuum, and there are always people who will, you know, try and harm a community like that.
Right. Yeah.
But you know, and I think, you know, I am not an ageist myself, but I do believe that, like, people, you know, mature differently. People have different life experiences that lead them to, you know, down different paths or mature in different ways. And making sure that we at least have that cap to know that everyone we're dealing with is at least a legal adult is, like, really important.
And just, you know, just from a frank psychological and neurological perspective, being 18 is a different stage of human growth and development than being 45. It just is.
Yes.
It's just different. Like, your brain is different. The way you relate to each other is different. It's an important thing to be realistic about. It doesn't necessarily mean that there's immediately going to be harm done. It just means that we look at the world differently, and we interact with each other differently when we're at different stages in our life.
I couldn't have said it better myself. And I mean, like, listen, I was 18 going on 8 years ago. Oof. You know, and, like, how I see, even how I see LARP now versus how I did then, or even how I see, you know, dubious content in LARP versus, like, now versus then, it's it's changed a lot. And I think some of that as well has also been the changing cultural consciousness around how we engage things like that. Like, I think, you know, I think it's a good thing that there has been a slight normalization of kink in our society, you know, whether that be through media or books or whatever. Good books, not the bad books. No 50 Shades here.
Oh boy. I wrote a blog post on that for anybody who wants to read me rant about 50 Shades.
Yeah, like, you know, but at least just having that increasing cultural consciousness, because I will say is that I think that normalizing kink has helped normalize it in LARP, or like the way we want to approach certain topics and certain things, which we will get into in the next video, has improved because I think we're starting to acknowledge, and I hope this video helps the further acknowledgement that they're really kink and LARP are not, you know, they're like cousins.
And I mean, kink is more stigmatized than LARP is.
Oh, absolutely.
In our culture.
Absolutely.
There's a few bad advertisements or something that make fun of LARP, and understand that if you're in certain parts of the country, it might be viewed differently depending on people's misconceptions of it. But in general, kink is far more stigmatized, and so as we destigmatize kink, LARP will follow right with it.
100%, that is definitely, and I can already see it, frankly. And, you know, I hope that our chat here today has kind of helped demystify this. And honestly, again, not all of this is everything that we're talking about here doesn't have to be inherently sexual. You know, it can be, but it doesn't have to be. And I think being able to have these frank and honest conversations about what this means to, you know, each of us and what it means as a community and to our games and to our experiences we don't have or maybe want to have or create or whatever, I think is half the battle. Like, demystifying this stuff for you guys is important, because it doesn't make you bad. It doesn't make you devious for,
unless you want to be.
Unless you want to be, yeah, of course. So the deviousness is up to you. But the interest in these things doesn't make you a deviant or a bad person or freak or whatever.
It's not
natural.
Immoral.
Yeah, it's not immoral. 100%.
Yeah. What is your general hope to see with the community and with the games as they progress with all of this?
You know, I really hope that we start to allow spaces that have dubious themes or challenge what we know as, you know, moral or immoral exist in our community. I want to be able to tell those more difficult stories. You know, I am a survivor myself, and I also have PTSD, and like, I don't think that, you know, I think that people should allow others a safe space to explore those things. Like, I think as somebody, as a person of color, if I want, like I said earlier, to explore my own oppression, I should be allowed to do that in a safe way. And so I'm hoping that in the coming years with LARP, that as those spaces hopefully begin to develop, I can only imagine what that's going to mean for LARP as an art form, like, going forward.
Yeah, and I want to go to all of the games.
Yes, yeah, definitely. Gotta come to all the games. So I guess we will wrap this up. Ray, thank you so much for coming on, at least for the first video, and we will have a second one that is going to go even deeper and darker, and I'm really excited to chat about it with you.
Yeah, me too. Y'all are gonna want to come back for round 2, because it's most likely gonna get Rocky demonetized, but
definitely,
that's all right.
For sure. For sure. Yeah. And I'm going to be posting all of Ray's social media links and everything down below. You can follow her on Instagram, and she constantly makes these amazing posts that talk about all sorts of mental health and you know, sexual health adjacent topics. So definitely go follow her.
Yes, and I've been waiting to say this all day, so Rocky's gonna, like, humor me for the sign-off.
Yes.
Be excellent to each other, and party on, dudes.
Woo! All right, guys. We'll talk to you next time. Bye!